Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 716. My name's Tom Cagley. I'm the host. This week, Jeff Perry and I discussed learning how to consciously guide your technology career. We all are problem solvers, and Jeff provides a ton of hard-won advice on how to solve career problems. We also wrestled with the difference between a series of jobs and a career. Jeff bio. Jeff Perry is the founder of More Than Engineering and serves as a leadership and career coach for engineers and technology professionals. His innovative programs and coaching help people take a mindful, intentional, and purposeful approach to career transitions, leadership, and personal development goals. Listeners to the SPaMCAST can find some free resources, including the Career Clarity Checklist at link in the show notes, by the way, but it's www.engineeringcareersaccelerator.com/SPaMCAST. They can also follow Jeff on LinkedIn. Again, link in the show notes. Hey, do you have questions you'd like Susan, John, Jeremy, Tony, or myself, the SPaMCAST crew, to answer? Leave a voice message at 01-440-668-5717 or email us at spamcastinfo@gmail.com. Jeff Perry, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Tom, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Let's start off with a softball question. So, what is a career?
A career is something that someone creates that in where they have the opportunity to trade the value and the skills and the impact that they can deliver for some form of compensation, and how they design and build to be able to do that. Now, that can take many, many different forms, but yeah, we'll go with that. That's my definition on the spot.
Okay, well, cool. What's the distinction between a job and a career?
Yeah, so I would separate them a little bit from a job as something, a place that you're in right now, where a career is more the path you take along your working and a career life. Okay, so a job is perhaps a moment in time, something that you're doing right now, but a career is something that is more intentional and designed especially when we do it well. And I hope we get to talk about some of that stuff today.
Well, what's well?
Well is also defined by the individual. Okay, so what I care about and seek for in my own career as I design it and try and live that out is going to be different than what you care about, Tom, and what any of our listeners here care about. And that's the beauty of it, is that we get to choose what well looks like for each of us, and therefore then go make that happen if we choose to.
But Jeff, I work for a company, and my company gives me a career ladder. They've already designed my career. I get to follow this career. I don't have input into that.
You may or may not have that input into kind of the standardized career ladders within your organization. And so but you do have a choice whether or not that standard path is right for you. Right? So each of us has that opportunity to decide, is this where I want to go? There's this path. Often large organizations especially will have multiple paths that people can take, maybe on the technical side or the leadership side, or maybe going into product or program management or project stuff, all sorts of different paths that people could take. And so you can take a standard path, you can do something else. In a different sort of organization, you could wear a lot of different hats if that's something interesting to you. You may be someone who's more on the maintaining and process improvement side, or you could be someone who's more on the greenfield creation of new products and services side. And so where do you want to go? Well, that's up to you. And we get to define that. And if some things are laid out for us in a particular situation, we can decide and figure out, does that work for us? And sometimes organizations will also be flexible within those. They're not always just rigid, right? It depends.
Well, I see many engineers that have an expectation that the company will tell them what their career is, and they'll follow that versus taking ownership of their own career. Who really owns your career?
Well, I am of the strong opinion that no one's going to care about your career more than you. Okay. And so if you're expecting someone else to come along and answer all your questions about your career and where you're headed and where you're going to go, then okay, you can do that and you can wait around, but you'll be taking a very reactive approach. And then you could end up years down the road and maybe you might like it. Some people do, and that's fine. But you might find that you've gone down a path that in the end, maybe this isn't what I really wanted to do or where I really wanted to take things. But because I didn't get proactive or intentional or deliberate, a lot of different words that we could use there, in my career approach and the path that I wanted to take, then this is where I ended up.
How does somebody become intentional?
Tom, we're going to talk about a lot of things here. And this is a fun conversation, by the way. You're really just throwing things at me. This is fun. I want to say we're going to talk about a lot of things. And if anyone's like me, when they listen to podcasts, right, they're usually doing something else, mowing the lawn or exercising out on a run or something like this. So I also put together some materials for the Software Process Management Cast listeners to think about what does designing my career look like for me? How do I go about doing that? So people can go, we're going to talk more about these things, but people can go to www.engineeringcareeraccelerator.com/SPaMCAST and go grab those resources, and we can make sure that that's available to people. But back to your question, how does one be intentional? Well, first, you need to define what your intention is. What is important to you? What do you value in your world as far as, we can think about really, things like work-life balance, time of day that you want to work. Some people are really wanting to get back into the office because they need that social interaction. Other people are like, hey, don't force me back into the office after COVID because I really love this flexibility and freedom and work from anywhere life. Again, that's different for everyone, right? Someone's like, hey, all I care about is work and how much money I make. Okay, if that's you, great. And other people want to work on specific causes that they care about, certain types of products, or maybe they just want the space to be able to do some of that on their own time, to be able to volunteer for nonprofits and other things. And maybe that's where they get their sense of other pieces of purpose and stuff like that. So really, it's defining those considerations around what type of role you want to be in, what you want the structure and the company and the culture to be that you want to be in, how you want to flex in terms of what your time looks like and spending in work, out of work, doing other things, so that you can design a life that is intentional because you've decided these are the things that are important to you. And therefore, when you have opportunities to make decisions, you can run it through essentially a set of filters, right, against those things that you've defined, or kind of think about it like a North Star. These are the things that I'm pointing towards, and I have opportunities saying, hey, is this going to pull me off that path? These things that are important to me, or is it still leading me in the direction, even if it's something that you didn't expect? Like, we can still be emergent as opportunities come our way, right? And that's fine. We're not going to. It's not like we got this magical treasure map and X marks the spot, and we're going to have everything mapped out step by step by step by step. That's not what I'm saying here, but we can define the things that are important to us so that when we have situations, opportunities, and challenges, we can run those against those things that we've defined and make the decision the best we can in the moment.
How often do you see people change that North Star and reinvent themselves?
Yeah, so I would say that the majority of people that I work with, perhaps, I don't know if we'd call it change, but I'd say perhaps for the first time in their lives have actually defined it. Mm-hmm. And on one hand, that's exciting because I get to see them do that. On another hand, that's sort of sad to me. But I can also see it in myself. It took me a while to really figure out and do that. And that can look like a mission statement, that can look like a set of core values, that can look at, these are the things that are important to me in my career. In fact, I've had a few people that said, hey, I'm this far in my career, I've done a lot of different things, but I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. Or someone else who is like, hey, I'm 20, 25 years into my career, but I'm unhappy. I want to find my happy place. They didn't know what that meant, right? And so they still hadn't really defined what those parameters were. And so in terms of how they align the skills, the experiences, the great value that they had to deliver, and what that looked like in a career situation that they could actually get excited about. And so we work through some of that with the work we do.
People become intentional. They define where they want to go, and then they can deal with what's emergent. Does it do things like you do set people on a path that is monotonic? It goes at one speed. Can it go faster? Do people come and say, hey, I need to accelerate?
Absolutely. And that's often one version of things that people are trying to figure out. They might feel stuck or stagnant in their current state, whatever that looks like. And so they are looking to accelerate, and that can be acceleration in their learning, their opportunities. It's not just stagnant in terms of how much money they may be making, but maybe they want to learn and have new opportunities because they feel like they're just doing the same things over and over again. So they don't feel that sense of growth and development. So acceleration can take many forms. But the definition of acceleration, that old in physics, force equals mass times acceleration. So it's force divided by mass equals acceleration, right? So in order to increase the acceleration, you have to increase the force. Another thing in like Newton's laws of motion, an object at rest will stay at rest unless acted upon by an outside force, right? So if someone is feeling kind of proverbially at rest or stuck or stagnant, you need to find some outside force, some motivation, or sometimes it's a coach or a mentor or someone close in your life or some other factor that can be the outside force to say, hey, let's push and move in the direction that we need to go and start accelerating this process.
So do you see career coaching, career mentorship as something that is useful to people in a technical career? Or is this just somebody who's going to go and take that management track for the rest of their life and forget how to code?
Well, I sure hope it's useful for people in their technical career because that's who I do it for. It's specifically for engineers and technology professionals. I do it for leaders too. But plenty of people are still deep in the technical work that I get to do this with. And so they're still trying to find alignment in terms of the skills and things that they want to learn and ways they want to grow, or the areas that they want to deliver impact. And it's such a critical thing for leaders to do inside of organizations. So how do we put people in the right places so that they can succeed and deliver their best work, right? But also as an individual to say, how can I do that sometimes within an organization, right? So might say, hey, I'm doing this technical work, but maybe I'm getting caught up in a lot of the other things that might not be a best use of my time. How can I continue to think about designing so that I can deliver the greatest impact for the organization and still be honest with the people around you instead of just, again, being reactive and saying, oh yeah, I have to go to all these extra meetings that might not be serving them or the organization, right? So there's a micro and a macro look at this for an individual. But yes, technical people can do this absolutely. And if we can do that well, I'm just a huge believer that engineers and technologists are some of the people who are going to solve some of the biggest problems that we have in the marketplace and some of the technologies we need to deliver to save and improve lives and deliver so many other things. And so if I can do my small part to help put people in the right places and help them develop and become the best version of themselves in that context, then they can go and deliver some really fantastic value in those situations.
There is an assumption that many in the technical side of the world are introverts. does it make it difficult for them to engage in getting career help or getting a mentor or getting, does that get in the way?
I don't know if introversion specifically does. And by the way, that is a stereotype that may or may not be serving.
I have no clue. Well, and I don't even know if it's true in reality.
Yeah, and I don't know what the data is, but introversion has nothing to do about whether or not people can communicate well. But it's more about like where they get their energy when they're with people or they're not. But all people, introverts and extroverts, are still social beings. We still need human and social connection in some form or fashion. What that looks like might be different in terms of what people would prefer in terms of introverts and extroverts. But does that get in the way? I don't know if that gets in the way as much as some of the other things. I mean, technologists and engineers are so smart. They've been trained. They've formed this identity as problem solvers, and they've solved so many different problems. So if they feel like there's a problem in their career, they also feel like, hey, maybe I can figure this out. And sometimes we take on this, I can figure almost any problem out, which is a great piece of that identity. But at the same time, I think this affects them in their careers and some of the collaboration work that we might do in our organizations when we try and take this, we can figure this out on ourselves instead of leaning on the people who have been there before or might be able to help us through those situations. And I think that's maybe more the detriment that holds people back from getting the help they need in multiple situations, certainly applied to career situations that we're talking about here.
So what are a couple of pretty common career mistakes that you would point out? Just sort of help people think through whether or not they're making some of those and need to throw up and say, I'll throw up their hands and ask for help.
Yeah. A few mistakes I see is people just kind of taking the opportunities that are only just right in front of them, right? So this is more taking that reactive approach. And I did that early in my career, and I hear all sorts of people that do this. And that, again, that might work for a while, but it's like, hey, Tom, we got this job over here. You want to take this? Oh yeah, it seems a little bit better than what I'm doing right now. Sure, I'll take that. And that's great if you really feel like that's a good opportunity. But it's, again, like taking that reactive stance. I'd say another mistake that people make, and this is maybe not as much a tactical mistake as much as a bigger picture piece here, is having really kind of a fixed mindset about their careers. And just to define that a little bit, people may have heard of or been familiar with the growth and the fixed mindset from the work of Carol Dweck and her book and TED Talk and other resources there. But this fixed mindset is like, hey, I think that this is kind of who I am and who I'm always going to be, and I don't really feel like I can develop and change. So we kind of take on this identity that we feel like is unchanging, of this is how we deliver value and what we're always going to be and what we're always going to do. Whereas seeing ourselves as pliable, changeable, where we can grow and learn and develop, whether that's a new skill, whether that's taking on new opportunity and being willing to do that when the opportunity arises rather than staying in our box of comfort. And so usually that diminishes the opportunities and the growth, both in the short and the long term, when people do that, making decisions maybe out of fear or uncertainty. And I love this quote from, I think, a psychologist named Virginia Satir. It's like, many people prefer the certainty of misery to the misery of uncertainty.
Ooh, that is nice.
And so, like, okay, are you just going to stay in the certain thing that even if it's miserable and not take any step towards, something different? Or can we embrace the uncertainty, which is hard to deal with, but will actually give us some opportunity to move through that and find something new and taking an approach that's maybe more experimental, right? So if we try something new, it doesn't mean that it may or may not work out, but we're essentially running a hypothesis, running an experiment. We're collecting data, seeing, does it work? Does it not work? If it does, great, let's continue on this path. If not, let's try something different. Like, that's okay. We don't need to stay locked in. So those are some things I would share there.
I still think people are terrified by the word experiment. And when it comes to career, I think they're even more terrified. How does one put, I ran this experiment on my LinkedIn profile.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, maybe many people are terrified, but the data also shows that a lot more people are experimenting in this last year. We have, maybe people have heard of like the Great Resignation from the last year or so. And in fact, I think 2021 had more people quitting their jobs than at any other time in the last few decades, okay, over the course of the year. And so a lot of people taking some new experiments and quitting jobs for all sorts of different reasons. But we need to figure that out. And so your experiment doesn't need to be macro, like, hey, I'm going to get out of here and hope I find something on the other side, or go completely change to a brand new job. It doesn't always have to be that. You can run micro experiments too. Sometimes that's just raising your hand and taking on a new project or responsibility in your current job to try something else out that you've wanted to explore, or shadowing someone, or volunteering outside of your organization to take on a responsibility that you're interested in. And so all sorts of things that we can experiment with. It might even be micro experiments where we can still have that opportunity to collect data, engage, and try something new in a different way and see if that fits.
When do people usually engage someone like you to help them understand and plot their future? Is it after a shock to the system? Is it, one morning they wake up contemplative? How does that actually happen? What's the driver that you see the most?
Yeah, I mean, in any case, the pain of inaction has gotten bigger than the pain of taking action. Okay. For all sorts of reasons, right? So, because it is hard to move through changes for many of us, all of us, right? And so what that can look like is many different forms of losing a job. We're seeing layoffs these days, and certainly a lot during COVID and in different situations. Or some of those experiences or something else gets people contemplative and considering, hey, is this really what I want to do? Or maybe I've tried something different. I hear plenty of people who they're trying something, trying to get new opportunities in their work. It didn't pan out, and said, I've given it a shot, and now I need to figure out how to find something new and what that looks like. Or people just gotten to that point where they're saying, hey, I know I need something different. Where I'm at is not serving me, and I'm probably also not doing my best work for my employer in this situation, but I don't know what's on the other side. And I need to figure that out. And I've been trying to figure that out, and I don't know how to do it. So I need some help here. So many different forms that can take, but eventually we get to this point where, hey, where I'm at right now is not doing it for me. I got to get some help. Let's find someone who can help.
So someone wakes up tomorrow morning, hits that gestalt moment, and says, okay, I got to do something. They call Jeff up, and how would Jeff help them?
Yeah, so I try and take this big picture approach, right? And so instead of saying, okay, if the acute pain is I need to find a new career opportunity, well, where a lot of people attempt to go is like, okay, I need to go search the job boards. Maybe I need to update my resume and polish things up. And that's where people go originally. Those things are fine, but I try and take a bigger picture approach and take a foundational approach to do some of the things that we've been talking about right here. Let's address some of the mindsets that we're going to be thinking through and moving through this whole experience. Let's get clarity, at least at this step that you're at right now, to focus on what are those things that are important to you as we consider making this next step, so that we can focus the efforts instead of casting too wide a net, which is going to not focus your efforts as effectively. And then how do you also kind of define your personal brand, right? And communicate who you are, the value you deliver, the skills, the experiences, and how does that communicate and connect with maybe what an employer, or maybe if you want to be a consultant or an entrepreneur, potential clients that you might have. right? And so how does that all connect, and how can you communicate that effectively? And then building on that foundation, then we can work on, pragmatic stuff. What do we need to do on LinkedIn and resume to get noticed, stand out, strategic networking, all that stuff. And then all the way to execution, those final steps, if you need to interview appropriately and kind of tell your story and show up well and even negotiate, which most technical people never thought about how to negotiate, other than, hopefully I can get more than what they had originally, offered me or something. They just don't know how to do it. I've never been through some of that stuff. But looking at that big picture process from a solid foundation to move through that in an effective way is what we work through.
So that's what you do in an acute scenario. I'm looking for toward the future and need to plan out the next 5 or 6 decades, or at least start to think through the next. What would be different? Or is it the same approach without the interviewee stuff?
Yeah. I mean, we probably wouldn't focus as much on the new career stuff. We would spend a lot more time really digging into those things that are important, and in multiple areas of life beyond just the career. Like you'd look at your personal relationships, the intellectual stimulation that you have and ways to get that. Maybe your physical health and other things too, looking at that big picture of you as a person, right? And then we can layer on some tools for, okay, if there's something you really want to change, take a really mindset shifting approach to this, because so often we start prescribing, here's all the behaviors you need to do, right? And we start to do that, but it's hard to make those behavioral changes, especially if our mindsets are still back where they used to be and pulling us back and not moving along with the sorts of change we need to make. So a lot of times we need to address those. What are those mindsets or beliefs or assumptions we might be making about ourselves and other people and the situations, and find ways to actually release some of those or shift some of those so that the changes we're trying to make in who we are, how we show up in the world and connect with things can actually shift as well. So we're trying to take a bigger picture of not just like, hey, what do I want my job title or type of company I want to work in? Like that's one thing we can look at, but who do I want to become as a person, right? That's maybe a little bit more existential, but something that I think, if we're trying to live good lives, we all ought to be thinking about.
Absolutely.
We're spending some time on.
Is there such a thing as work-life balance?
Maybe. And honestly, Tom, this is stuff that I've been thinking about myself a lot, on the balance of things. Like, what does balance really mean, right? Because if things are perfectly balanced, then there's no movement either, right? And so, and spending time with my family is important to me. I've got a lovely wife and 3 young children, and so trying to design the type of work that I do and how I approach my work so that I also have more flexibility and time with them, something that's really important to me. And as I continue thinking about, it's an iterative process, right? But I continue thinking about, how do I want to continue building what is my business more than engineering or other opportunities I might want to consider, and moving it through those filters that I'm building and continue to revisit personally. How do I put those different factors? Because the different areas of personal life, right? It's, family is one thing. My personal health, that's another thing in my personal life that I need to take care of to some degree. Other areas of delivering value or contributing to the community and things, that's another area that we might really care about, certain causes and things. And so how do we do that all? Well, we can't do necessarily everything, but running that through those things that are important to us, then we can find that mix that is right for us at a certain period of time. That mix will continue to change at different stages of our lives.
If you woke up tomorrow morning, someone gave you a caffeinated beverage of choice, tea, coffee, diet, something or other, and a magic wand, and with 2 wishes, had the power to change any 2 things that affect how people live and define and manage their careers, what would those 2 things be and why?
Yeah, I'd say number 1, it's another mindset we might talk about is this comes from a group called the Arbinger Institute, that they define this mindset as the outward mindset, which is the idea of seeing people as people, rather than the antithesis of that as seeing people as objects that we're just trying to get things out of. So as the people that we're working with in our organizations, or the people that we might be trying to network with or interviewing with and different things, like, how do we see the people in our lives as people that matter like we matter, and consider how we're communicating and interacting with them in a meaningful way? If I had a magic wand and we could all improve our approach to doing that in meaningful ways, I think that would change organizational cultures. That would change how many of us approach our ability to do the work that we do, and start to then, and even move through our careers and those different interactions that we do that, both as we're shifting careers and building a career at an organization, right? So I do that. And the other side is just the individuals, again, going back to this idea of defining who you want to become, the things that are important to you, and continue to go back to that. And so the magic wand would be to have people actually take time, spend that time to do that work. And it's deep, hard, introspective, reflective work to define those things and consider the different options and things that we need to look at that might be important to us. But it's work worth doing if you want to live a life that is meaningful to you.
I think that's fair. Before we start to wrap with, how to get in touch and all that stuff, you do a podcast. You want to tell the listeners about your podcast and how they can find it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's on most, if not all, of the main podcast platforms. It's called the Engineering Career Coach Podcast, and it's in partnership with the Engineering Management Institute. So Anthony Fasano, who runs EMI, launched the podcast in 2013, and then as COVID hit, sort of took a break from it. And so I had connected with Anthony and already collaborated with him on a few other things. And I raised my hand and said, hey, if you need someone to continue hosting, I'd be happy to do that. So fall of 2020, I kind of became the primary host. And so we put out a couple episodes a month with people in different industries and things, talking about how do we build meaningful careers and build mentors and different sorts of technologies and things that we're talking to people about. Pretty broad across engineering disciplines, but it's a fun one to interview on my side. I get to be on that side.
Wicked. So how can people find out more about Jeff Perry, what he can deliver, how you can help them?
Yeah, so the resource that I shared earlier, www.engineeringcareeraccelerator.com/SPaMCAST. And they do need to put in those W's for it to work right.
Okay.
That'll give them what I call my career clarity checklist. It's a set of resources and videos and exercises to go through and consider what are those things that are important to you. So I don't want to just say, go figure this out. I hope that this resource
but we are engineers,
that will
right?
guide you through that process in a way that can be useful. And then if you feel like you need more, reach out and find me through that. And I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. People can find me there and other places. But that's where I'd point people to without giving them all the things. www.engineeringcareeraccelerator.com/SPaMCAST.
And make sure you get the www in there. We'll have all of that in the show notes so that people can link to that. And if they are out jogging or riding their bike or driving their car, they should try, sometimes you can take notes when you're doing that, but not often. Super. As you know, right as we wrap up, I open up the platform for you to promote anything that you'd like. The platform is yours for 2 to 3 minutes. It's all yours, Jeff.
Yeah, Tom, it's been a pleasure to chat here, and thanks so much for your kindness in doing this. I really find I love doing this work and helping people move through these intentional career transitions and also leveling up their leadership capabilities. So some of the things that people might be interested in is joining my Engineering Career Accelerator program, which is really taking this big picture approach, some of the principles that we've talked about today, to designing what does that next step look like and how do we make that happen? How do we get that career? So if people anyone who's listening who is really considering, hey, maybe there is more I can find in my career. They're feeling unsatisfied or underpaid, or they're unemployed for some reason. I encourage you to reach out. You can start with that career clarity checklist that we talked about, engage and get a little test of what this might look like, or you can reach out directly. But I'd love to have a conversation to see, can we help you design and live with intention as you take this next step and beyond. I'd love that opportunity to do that with anyone who needs it.
Super. Jeff, this has been marvelous. I enjoyed the conversation and hopefully look forward to hearing that a whole gaggle of Software Process and MeasurementCast listeners have downloaded the document and engaged with you. So again, thank you for spending time on a Friday afternoon. And I look forward to having another conversation, because there are a number of ideas that I have to other threads to pull based on this conversation.
I would love that, Tom. I hope to stay connected here. Thanks so much.
In Reread Saturday News, Chapter 5 begins Part 2 of Coaching Agile Teams by Lyssa Adkins and is titled Coach as Coach Mentor. During my initial read of this book, I found Part 2 the most immediately useful. During this reread, I reflect less on techniques to engage people in teams and more on engagements that I've had and where my remit and my behavior took me off track. Remember to buy a copy of Coaching Agile Teams by Lyssa Adkins and read along. There's a link in the show notes. There's also a link in the show notes to all of the previous installments of this reread. In the next Software Process and MeasurementCast, number 717, we'll focus on why work in process, otherwise known as flow load, is the leading indicator of flow metrics. We'll also be joined by Tony Timble, who brings his To Tell a Story column to the podcast. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?